Welcome, Coleman Report Live, post-Labor Day, post-Hurricane Dorian session. Lance, good to see you.
Hey, I'm glad to be here, Bob. I had to scramble today because I closed the loan about 45 minutes ago. Had to rush back to the camera.
Hey, I want to make sure everyone understands the importance. Go back a slide, Joseph. I understand everyone understands the importance of these certificates. Please download them, save them in a file. They are documentation when you are asked by a host of regulators, SBA, what you're doing for training. And Lance, this certainly qualifies as training, don't you think?
Absolutely. The webinars you participate in, even the conferences at the end of this, we'll talk about conferences.
Keep track of all this stuff. And I apologize for retelling the story, but don't call us in the last week of December and asking for the previous 2 years worth of certificates. We'll do it, but don't do that.
Well, I think the important thing, Bob, is just tracking your efforts to make sure your SBA lending staff is well trained. Regulators want to know, the SBA wants to know. It's a good thing to do. And this is part of it.
This is absolutely. Hey, we have Bob Judge on, co-founder, Government Loan Solutions. Bob, I understand you're camera shy today.
Yeah. Unfortunately, my computer is not in the same room I'm in, so I'm just going to have the just my voice.
Well, we'll take it. Hey, we had to make a change for a couple logistical reasons, but the Secondary Market Summit 12th annual is going to be January 7th, 2020 on a Tuesday, I believe, in Washington, D.C. No, I apologize. It's going to be on a Wednesday, January 8th. Come a day early, and there'll be a reception. Bob, what do we have on the agenda for this year?
Well, we have a lot of the same content we have every year, talking about the current status of the secondary market from a pricing perspective, volume, things like that. We'll also do a deep dive into prepayments, defaults, and voluntary. Also we also like to talk about what's driving the market. It seems to me that's always changing. So we'll talk about what's causing premiums to be where they are. We touch on USDA, 504, all the other programs too to some extent.
What's really cool, Bob, is you and I started this back in 2008 in New York, and we quickly got smart and said, hey, if we go to Washington, D.C., the SBA officials will show up, and we get great participation by SBA, and they don't have to do that, and they show up.
Yeah, no, it's great with those guys show up, and you have a chance to talk to them one-on-one, which is not a frequent occurrence. With the SBA, they do show up to Nagels, but you don't really have much time with them. So this is an opportunity to be one-on-one with some of the senior people at SBA.
Bob, someone's looking at this chart. I don't know if you're on a computer. It says SBA actual 7/8 prepaid stay above 17%. I know there's some people out there who have no idea what that means. Please explain.
Basically, it's looking at where prepayments currently are, and they've been hovering around 17%. What that means is basically that on any given loan, the expectation is that 17% of a balance will prepay in a given year, which is high historically. The average has been somewhere in the 12% range. So 17 is definitely in the high end, which shortens the average life. It makes it harder for investors to pay high premiums. However, today premiums are still pretty high, so it's still a good time to sell. And a lot of that has to do with the current interest rate environment in the country. Rates are low, so people are stretching for yield, and SBA is not immune to that as well. So it's a good time for lenders to be selling. Prepayments are high, but premiums are still looking pretty good.
And I have to ask the question, are we talking defaults when you say prepayment? Define prepayment.
Prepayment is the combination of defaults and voluntary payoffs.
There you go.
Defaults are still very low, again, historically, so they're not really a concern. They haven't been a concern for quite a while, at least 5 or 6 years. It's the voluntary prepayments that are always historically always a major issue, and they're a little bit on the high side these days.
Well, I strongly encourage you. We've extended the early bird through the end of September. Please get your CFO there. All the other trade organizations will devote an hour to the secondary market. We devote a full day. Last year we had Senator Risch, the chairman of the Small Business Committee, as the keynote speaker. We had a great private tour of the President George H.W. Bush's memorial. So that was, and we're going to get another high-profile speaker as soon as that's confirmed. We will announce. Bob, thank you very much. And let's go to the poll question. For your 2020 budget, do you plan on selling loans to the secondary market with prepays over 17%?
Well, one of the other things that would be an interesting question, Bob, is do you expect prepays to lower because we had a reduction in the prime interest rate, and they're talking about yet possibly another one? That may slow the prepays a little bit.
There you go. 51% are selling the loans. For your 2020 budget, do you plan on increasing volume or decreasing volume? What are you putting in your budget? I know we're putting together our budgets at this point in time.
Bob, I hope, and I expect to see a lot of people say increase.
Yeah, wow, 92%. And what's interesting is we still don't know the effect of the budget. Rumors of SB Express going up to $1 million, which is going to be very lender friendly, very Main Street friendly. So that's, I am not shocked by those results, Lance.
Well, if Express goes up to $1 million, Bob, you're going to see a flurry of activity because it is an easier program to implement for a participant lender. It's not that a PLP deal is that much more difficult, but doing a quick Express loan on a deal, especially if you have a great borrower. You've got a great borrower who wants to buy some equipment. The Express product is good for that. You can do real estate. Bob, I did a 25-year term real estate loan with the Express loan program. It was a stronger customer, a great piece of real estate for their business. But if it goes up to $1 million, Bob, we're going to see a surge.
Yeah, and the budget authority will be there, I'm convinced. I know we haven't talked about the budget, but Congress is, I don't know, I guess they're coming back. It will be resolved by the end of September. These things tend to go to the 11th hour. I am still optimistic. They're not going to shut down the program. That's my personal opinion.
No.
In 2020, do you see small businesses hiring more people? And we should have been better in this question. Do you see your customers, your Main Street customers, hiring more employees? That should have been a better question. Go ahead, Lance.
I look forward to seeing the response on this, Bob. My general inclination is that small business is still doing pretty well and that we will see an increase in employment in small business in 2020.
There you go. There you go.
And, if you go back and look historically, job growth typically is the engineer behind job growth are small business owners. And I think we'll see growth next year.
Speaking of growth, Coleman Publishing has hired a new contributor. Katie, we'll bring you in, but my little small businesses, we're doing it. But hey, before we bring Katie in, this is an interesting question, Lance. And the question has to do with when we are evaluating credit risk, do we tier the guaranteed portion from the unguaranteed portion and weigh that to come up with the overall score? Lance, do you see that out in the industry?
Well, I don't see it very often, Bob, but I have seen it on occasion. Historically, I've done a lot of file reviews for different participant lenders, and I've seen some that, in fact, do that. I think most participant lending institutions, put a risk rating on the whole loan and don't separate the the guaranteed and unguaranteed portion. And Matt, I want to apologize in advance if we're off on the wrong track. Be sure and email us and let us know more specifics about this question. But as a whole, most participant lenders are risk rating the loan as a whole and not separating the guaranteed and unguaranteed portion.
Yeah, I don't have an issue with that. You just meld it all together. I mean,
But there definitely is different levels. Well, it's kind of hard. The guaranteed portion has risk. We talked about that before we got on the call, Bob. You don't service the loan properly. You don't document the loan file properly. There's pretty significant risk on an SBA guaranteed portion of a loan. And these people who sell them on the secondary market sometimes find that out. Some participant lenders will sell one on the secondary market and say, oh, I'm done.
Lance, I should know these numbers off the top of my head because I'm a big stat guy. What percentage of loans are repaired and what percentage are denied?
Well, the denial rate is very low, and the denial rate is very low. And I'm going to throw a number out, and guys, this is not from SBA. This is more from when I work for SBA. SBA pays more than well over 90% of all guaranteed purchase.
Well over 95%. Yeah.
It's I would say the guaranteed denials probably fall in the 5% or less range. However, they do repair a significant number of those. A number of things could create a repair. For instance, not properly dispersing your loan, dispersing proceeds for things that were not allowed in the original authorization, or not properly evidencing the equity injection on the loan. Of course, that might cause a denial, but it also could cause a repair. For instance, say you were required to get a $200,000 equity injection and you only got 180 that you can verify. You might get a denial, but you most certainly could expect a repair. So the repair percentage, I'm not sure. I've heard, Bob, that, about 94, 95% of the guarantees are paid. I've heard 20 or 30% of those that are paid have a repair. Now, I could be way off, guys. No,
but that's consistent with what I've heard. I think what I would tell Matt is do not assume that guarantee is on a 75-25 split. If you want to go down this road, do not assume that 100% of that guarantee is going to be paid. I would put a little fudge factor in, maybe 95%, and then on the unguaranteed portion, go ahead and do a little bit lower. But I love the question, and I love the analytics, and I love that we're bringing big data into our portfolio analysis, Lance.
Well, and here's the thing, Bob. Matt may have an exceptional servicing and liquidation department, so he's 100% closing, servicing, and liquidation. He's certain the guarantee's good. But Bob's exactly right. You better factor in, there could be errors in closing, could be errors in servicing, could be errors in liquidation that all potentially could cause a repair.
We're in the business of risk assessment, and sometimes when we do risk, we make bad decisions. Hey, let's see, what do we got here? Let's bring Katie in. Katie Watucky. That's your cue, Katie. You have to push the button. You're doing great work for us. Tell us about the OIG report that you on these early default loans. What happened in this situation?
Right. So this one was fairly simple. The problem was that the lender had a file that it contained invoices that were stamped paid, but it did not contain documentation to prove where those payments were coming from. And so the problem that the SBA was seeing was that they couldn't tell if that was gifted from family members, which is what they were claiming, or if that was borrowed and expected to be paid back.
Lance, why do we keep seeing these type of errors?
Well, and I walk into a meeting with a customer quite often, and one of the first things we discuss after we get some details on the project is equity injection. And one of the first things that I like to get proven is the amount and source of that equity injection. And in the case of a gift, there has to be an appropriate gift letter that shows that there's no expectation of repayment that is executed. And we have to be able to source that gift. You can't just assume that the source, suddenly $200,000 shows up. You need to see the accounts and where that gift is coming from. And equity injection verification and proof is one of the most common reasons for denial. Sometimes, like I said, if you verify 80 or 90% of it and you missed a little, you may get a repair. But if you have little or no documentation to verify the equity injection, you're going to get a denial.
I think where we make these mistakes is we have different standards for equity injection for a conventional loan where it goes through a title company and we don't
Yeah.
need to. Where SBA has very specific guidelines on what they see. And the reason why SBA does this is because there's been a lot of fraud in the past. That these people, there's no equity in these loans.
And the other thing, there's a lot of Inspector General's reports that talk about, for instance, gifts. Somebody says they gifted $200,000 for equity injection, and as soon as the loan closes, they start making payments on that gift. And the same thing is true on borrowed funds. Without the standby agreement for the full life of the loan, it cannot be counted as equity injection. And sometimes they'll have borrowed money where they start repaying the loan, even though everyone knows that SBA doesn't allow it, including the borrower. So they want to see the source of the equity injection. They want to see the appropriate agreements in place, whether it be a gift letter or a standby agreement. They want to see a copy of that note if it's borrowed funds. But you need to properly document. And if we looked at, and I'm sure Katie looked at these, but if you look at a bunch of Inspector General reports, a large percentage of them are related to unverified equity injection.
Hey, Joseph, let's move ahead. Let's move to Fraud Friday. Katie, the reason why we're covering this story isn't to pick on Carrie Agee, but it's just let the industry know the mistakes that are being made out there and the severe penalties that can happen. And there's a huge number of takeaways. Number one is first of all, let's do the right thing. And number two, let's be careful what we put in emails. What happened in this situation, Katie?
Right. So this is just kind of an update on what is happening and what we know according to the indictment. What happened was there's seven loans listed on the indictment, and several of those loans have BankServe employees who were directed by Carrie Agee or another supervisor.
Allegedly.
Right. Allegedly. To commit fraud. And so here's this problem with this particular loan. They have a lending institution who sought BankServe's assistance, and the BankServe employee who received this email asking for help, she said, well, we can't really do this because the money was supposed to be going toward past due payroll taxes, and that's just not allowed. Well, she thought about it and she said, well, we could just leave that off and say that it's just working capital. So then supposedly Carrie Agee encouraged this employee to go ahead and file this loan and submit it. It got denied, and it got denied, and then she asked them to resubmit it under an SBA Express, which went through, but then it eventually defaulted, and the SBA ended up purchasing that.
Yeah. I have a whole slew of comments on this, Lance, but number one, let's do the right thing and don't cut corners, Lance.
And guys, working capital can be used for a lot of things. I mean, you can pay payroll, but not past due payroll taxes. You can pay for advertising. You can pay for a lot of different things. And when you disperse working capital, when working capital is used for proceeds, the draw request doesn't necessarily have to have an amazing amount of detail, but this is one of those backdoor things where, using working capital to pay, past due payroll taxes is clearly not an acceptable use of proceeds.
Well, it's in the 1920, I believe, Lance, where you're certifying that you're not doing that. So.
Well, additionally, the borrower committed fraud on their 1919 if this was the case.
Yeah. So this is what I call the classic checklist banker. We get our mentality that if I can do these 20 things, I can do the loan without asking the question, what does this make sense? Do we really want to loan money to a company but they're not paying their payroll taxes? I mean, you talk about a huge red flag, Lance.
Well, one final comment on this, express processing. What do we submit GP? What do we submit PLP? What do we do express? Well, if you submit something GP, it means that you have concern, this is my philosophy. If you have concerns about eligibility, you submit it GP and you live with the yes or no that SBA provides you.
Yeah.
But I know technically you can go and do an express loan on a deal that gets declined GP, but should you? The answer is no. There was an eligibility issue clearly to begin with, and that's why it was submitted GP. So turn around, that SBA is going to look at that loan if anything ever happens.
My last comment is I believe this should be more civil than criminal, but understand who your partner is. Understand your partner builds prisons and carries guns, and if you lie to them, it's a crime. I'm not. Anyway, go ahead, Lance. Get me out.
Well, I just think this is a great example of the old adage, do the right thing. SBA lending throws us a playbook. It's the 50-10-5K. We all work to understand that SOP. But it still comes down to doing the right thing.
Okay, let's move on. I think we've pontificated on that. We got Flagle coming up. We got NADCO, NAGO. We are moving the secondary market summit to January 8th. The National Rural Lenders Roundtable is a great event for USDA. It's a sponsored event. I believe if it's not free, it's very, very minimally priced. Not so much for the secondary market. We're more capitalist on that one, Lance. Am I going to see you? And I know Katie's going to come out there, Lance.
I absolutely am going to give it 120% effort to be there. I was there last year, heard Senator Reich. He was awesome. And I got a chance to speak. So it was a great, great conference.
Very good. And these are upcoming webinars, Lance. We had to push, we pushed 5 critical C's December 25th. We have our USDA training on the 18th. We're doing a repeat of global cash flow, which Lance and I love to do. Yeah. That's a fun one. And the sponsored webinar, it's a free one on the 401k. And with that, thank you all for joining us. Katie, thank you. Lance, thank you. Send us your questions.
Have a great weekend.